Hey everybody, what's up? It is me, Timalik, and I'm back for another video. This one is going to be kind of an awkward video, but I promise you guys I'm going to be uploading another story today. So if you're looking for that on the channel, it's coming. If you don't want to hear any of this religious kind of stuff, then tune away from this, because this is targeted towards a very specific audience of people. I see a lot of people on YouTube and even in real life making very good cases for not believing in God. A lot of atheists make atheism seem as if it is the more enlightened or more intellectual decision. And so the purpose of this video is not to argue for the Christian faith or the Jewish faith or for any particular religion in general. However, it is to argue that atheism in and of itself relies on a foundation of knowledge that one simply cannot have. So I'm going to try to accomplish this goal by going through kind of a list of questions that a lot of atheists kind of ask people that believe in God and say, oh, they can't answer them, therefore God's not real. So that's the purpose of this video. It's going to seem from time to time throughout the length of this video that I'm arguing for the Christian faith, but you have to understand that I was raised Christian. I have the most familiarization with the Christian background, so a lot of my examples are going to be based off of that. If you're another type of theist, if you're a Buddhist or Hinduist, not trying to say that you're wrong, I'm not trying to say that atheists are wrong, hell, I'm not even trying to say that Christians are right. All I'm trying to point out in this video is that atheism is not the answer. So here we go. The first question that I have written down, and I took a lot of sources through the internet here, is if God knows everything we're going to do in the future, then we do not have free will, right? Because if he knows it, then he knows what our destinies are. But a lot of people in a lot of different, religious organizations say that we do have free will, so how can you explain that? And I figure it's probably better to show, not tell, right? As an author, that's something we hear all the time. So I have a little demonstration here. I've got with me the complete fiction of H.P. Lovecraft, and I've read this. I've read everything in this, therefore I know this book. If you say, hey, do you know H.P. Lovecraft? I'm going to say, yes, I've read all of his stories, right? And there's a couple dozen short stories in here, right? That being said, I cannot tell you every single word of every single story in this book, but I know them, which might seem a little bit strange, but here's perhaps a better diagram of what I'm trying to explain. If you were to take a circle and fill that circle with absolutely everything, right? All the things that do exist, all the things that could not possibly exist, everything that you can think of, right? And I know that that's a little bit mind-boggling, but bear with me here. There's only a certain number of things that can exist, right? That can happen based off of our laws of nature, right? Based off of what's in the universe. And if God knows all of those things, then he is all-knowing. If he knows everything that can happen and can distinguish those from everything that cannot happen, in fact, if he understands all parts of this, then he is all-knowing. That's not to say that he knows the particular paths that we are going to choose, however, that he knows every path that is available. Therefore, he does know everything, but in the same way, he doesn't know what decisions you're going to make. That's one potential argument to this, right? And again, I'm not a religious scholar. I'm not going to be able to provide you with the perfect answer to every question, but I hope you get that. Basically, if I can know every story in this, and if I ask you if you knew The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, you might say yeah, and you might even know the Once Upon a Midnight Dreary While I Pondered Weak and Weary, right? You might know the story, but if you don't know every single word, you don't really know it. So that question really relies on a basic human principle of knowledge, and we're trying to apply a human principle of knowledge to an all-knowing being, and that's why I think the question gets so stirred up in people's mind. We're trying to apply our concept of what we know to a concept of what an all-knowing being could know, which is impossible. Okay, here was kind of an interesting one that I struggled with. God couldn't stop a murder when there were only 4 people on Earth, right? Of course, referring to Cain taking the life of Abel. And this is something that, at first, I thought was a little bit weird to think about, but the more I contemplated this, again, with another hypothetical here, right? If I lock you in a room, and force you to do the right thing, right? I force you to brush your teeth at night. I force you to eat your vegetables. I force you to make the right decisions. Every single thing you do, I force you to make the right decision. Am I really loving you? Am I really doing the right thing? Am I doing right by you? And if I really did love you, wouldn't I give you the opportunity to make mistakes on your own or to do bad things? Now, this question, there's also like a ton of debate about going back to even the original words kind of in that book in Hebrew. The word for homicide wasn't like clearly defined, and it was more accurately described as bloodshed. And so it's like totally mind-boggling, but basically it comes down to, if I force you not to do bad things, right? If I force you to do good things, then I'm not loving you. And at least in the Christian faith, we understand one God as being this all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful being, right? So there's that. This is another good one. 99.9% of all the species that God created are now extinct. How many do-overs does God need? It's interesting at surface level because you might think, yeah, why would a perfect being even be capable of making anything less than perfect? But who's to say that these species didn't exist only to serve the purpose of creating new species or influencing the world to fulfill God's plan, right? Again, I'm not trying to argue for the sake of there being one true God. I'm not trying to argue on behalf of any particular church. All I'm saying is that if you do believe, and if you take what I'm saying as true, just for a brief moment, right? I'm not asking you to instantly convert from atheism to another religion. I'm asking you to change your perspective and go into the perspective that there is at least one God, right? Whatever that means to you. Wouldn't the way a God does things, right? Wouldn't a way that the God influences the things that we see be perceived differently by us than the way that the God did them, right? So it's kind of like when you're talking about quantum physics or quantum mechanics, right? How we're constantly moving in the fourth dimension without being aware that we're moving within the fourth dimension. In the same way that I can illustrate to you with something called a Mobius strip, right? If you take a thin piece of paper and you take one of the corners here and one of the corners here, and you twist these to meet each other, right? Then you've got essentially a representation of a two-dimensional plane, right? A two-dimensional plane that would never stop moving, okay? And so if you imagine a little two-dimensional person starting at this point on the plane and moving around the back of the plane, then this person would seemingly be going on in a straight line forever, not being aware that they were moving around within the third dimension. And the reason for this is because we have to perceive things in the way that we're capable of perceiving them, right? So when we talk about a God creating a universe, right? As humans, we're going to have a human perception of how that happened. And when we talk about the way that we currently perceive the world, we might look at these extinct species and perceive those extinct species in the only capability we have, which is through a human capability of understanding what extinction is, and understanding what these animals were, and analyzing their bones and things like that. But that's not necessarily to say that just because those sciences correlate to what we see today is how things always were, or even how things had happened before. I hope I did a good enough job at explaining that, but basically the kind of Cliff Notes version of that is just who's to say that these species didn't exist only to serve a specific purpose, and who are we to know that purpose? Okay, here's a really good one that I see a lot of atheists using all the time, and I think that this is something that we should spend a little bit of time on. If God loves us, and He's all-powerful, why does He allow evil to exist? Why did He let the Holocaust happen? Why does He let good people die young? Why do people murder, rape, steal, things like that? It kind of comes back to my previous point of, if I force you to love me, then I'm not being very loving. You know, if I take away your options to do evil things, then I'm enslaving you. And if you're asking then, okay, so that explains why people are capable of doing evil things, but it doesn't explain why God is letting bad things happen to people that love Him, right? So you could say, okay, well, yeah, sure, God doesn't want to take away your free will, so he allows you to take a loaded firearm, point it at somebody's head, and pull the trigger, but why does he allow that person to die, right? This can be entirely different on a case-by-case scenario. You know, when I think about my life and I think about the bad things that have happened to me, I see those as extensions of the person that I am now. When I think about those that have died in my life that I thought really dearly of, I feel better when I imagine those people as being in a better place, more like God had, and I know this is going to sound really screwed up, more that God had allowed them to die than necessarily took them away from me. But again, this is on a case-by-case scenario, and I'm not trying to argue that these things happen for a reason, right? Because sometimes bad things just happen. All I'm trying to say is that just because bad things happen doesn't disprove the possibility of there being a kind being out there. If I force you to love me, I'm not loving you, and that's not the God I believe in, right? All right. This is a... All of these are pretty good, man, but this was one that I kind of wrote a lot about. So... Every time science and religion have gone head to head, science wins, right? And I'm not saying that that's true. I'm saying that that's what I have written down. That's what I saw some people saying in different articles and in the comments section on different YouTube videos. Even in YouTube videos, if you type "God's not real" in the search bar, you'll find millions of results. So yeah, okay. This is what I have written down. Tim Minchin, who's this hilarious musical comedian, once said, "Science adjusts its views based on what's observed. Faith is the denial of observation so that belief can be preserved." And this is one of the points that I kind of cede to the atheists and I kind of retract from the church a little bit on. Your average cookie-cutter, church-going theist would probably still believe that the earth was the center of the universe, if not for science challenging the church all the way back when it did, right? We used to have an egocentric view of the universe, and then, during certain Enlightenment periods, there were awesome scientists who kind of elaborated on the way that we should be viewing the universe and the stars and things like that. And it was one of the most memorable times that science really challenged the church, which was kind of this huge government organization all the way back then. And here's what I'll say, and I know that this goes against a lot of people's faith. What I understand from my religion is that God is perfect and men are not. And churches are organizations of men, and I say men meaning humans. I'm sorry for gendering civilization, but what I'm trying to say is this, that God's perfect, men aren't. Churches are organizations of men created to worship God. So obviously, the church is not going to be right 100% of the time. We are fallible. It's not like we meet every Sunday and there's a physical representation of God sitting on a chair holding court and going, oh, well, this is the way the universe is, and this is what happened to all the dinosaurs, and by the way, the Shroud of Turin is this, and so we can't have that complete and total understanding of the world just through our faith alone. That's what's up to us, man, to figure it out. So that's kind of where I differ from the church and where I've got to give the atheists credit. I agree. Science, when it butts head with religion, wins. But science and religion can exist simultaneously. I do not argue in favor of any religion that denies science in order for their faith to be preserved. That's preposterous. I do argue for the churches and for the religious organizations that say that both can exist, because I am a scientific-minded person. All people are, to a certain extent, some more than others, but I do believe in a God, and I happen to also believe in science. So, I'm living proof of it, and there's a lot of people out there who I'm sure could say the same. So, also, if you want an example of maybe something that could counter this, I would Google the Shroud of Turin. It was supposedly the burial shroud that was laid over Jesus Christ when he died, and there was a lot of very, very interesting stuff that happened with this shroud. Not trying to use this as an example of some magical linen that proves the power of God or anything like that, but what I am trying to say is that there are certain areas where science hasn't caught up with religion yet. There are still things that science can't explain, and religion kind of says that it can, regardless of whether the religion is in the right or in the wrong. It's not to say that science always wins. That's what I'm saying. All right. So here's going to be another point that I differ a lot from a lot of different churches. People say that God loves all of his children. Then why do most Christians say that atheists and homosexuals are burned in hell for eternity? You know, I was raised with a very particular kind of moral compass that when it came to religion, I was always taught to love the sinner and hate the sin, and we're all sinners, right? So that's what I grew up believing, and I think that religious fanatics and overzealous churchgoers ruin what churches were supposed to be founded on, and that's love. You know, Romans 12:9, and I know Bible verses, I'm sorry to the other theists from other religions, but Romans 12:9 says, love must be sincere, hate what is evil, cling to what is good. And Romans 13:10 says, love does no harm to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfillment of the law. I especially like the second one for this stance because here's the deal, right? Believe in Jesus, love yourself and the people around you, and you're done. That's 100% the Christian faith. You can find the brightest, most intellectual religious scholar you want to, and I will argue that point tooth and nail with him, because when Jesus came and died for our sins, man, he fulfilled all of that Old Testament stuff. You know, all of it. He died for you to be able to have that. And, you know, when you love yourself, when you love the people around you, when you love God through his son Jesus, the Christian faith anyway tells us that all else will be forgiven. So to those organizations that would bash somebody who wanted nothing but to show their love for another person, shame on them. Right, that's not what religion is supposed to be, at least not in my eyes. So I completely agree with the atheists on this point. If there is a religious organization out there that preaches principles of hate instead of love, I don't think that these are the people who can say that they follow or that they worship an all-knowing, all-loving God. I think those people are being less than honest with themselves, and I think that they seriously need to realign themselves from a religious perspective. But overall, here's what I'm going to leave you guys with. You know, I've answered a lot of questions here today from a religious perspective, so I want to pose a question from a religious perspective. This admittedly is a bit of a trick question. It's something that you cannot answer, therefore I'm right. But a lot of these questions were phrased that way as well. So from all the religious people out there, here you go, atheists, here's one for you. I want you to imagine everything that is possible to be known, right? Every single thing that you could know, whether that be science, math, history, anything, everything that you could know. Imagine that on a pie chart, right? I want you to then try to understand what percentage of everything that could be known that you know, right? I would assume that for me personally, it's like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent. Man, there's so much out there and I know so little. And I would imagine that even for the smartest person, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say that it's close to being half, right? Which is absurd, but let's say that it's close to being half. That other 51% at minimum could be the existence of a God. And I know that the original reaction is, well, in that part that I do know, I know that there's not a God, right? But whenever you have a stance, if you're a scientifically minded person, you adjust your views based off of what's observed, right? That's an atheist quote. That's your logic coming right back at you, right? That's the word of Tim Minchin, who said, Science adjusts its views based on what's observed. Faith is the denial of observation so that belief can be preserved, right? Adjust your views based off of what's observed. And if you are intelligent enough to know that you know virtually nothing, then you should be intelligent enough to know that in that segment of things that you don't know could be the proof that you would need to adjust your views to believe in God. Therefore, the answer to is there a God for everybody should be I don't know. And for me, honestly, the answer is I don't know, but I believe there is. My name is Tim Malik. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a thumbs up. I would love to see your guys' comments in the comment section below. I know there will be a lot of flack for this. I might even lose subscribers, but hey, you know, this channel's all about kind of expressing ourselves and getting what we need to say out there. So thank you all so much for watching. My name is Tim Malik, and as always, I will see you all next time. See you guys.